Now, the UK is one of the most heavily monitored countries on Earth, with around 4.2 million CCTV cameras. That's one for every 14 people. But how effective are they at fighting crime? Professor Martin Gill is a criminologist and works for Perpetuity Research into crime and CCTV. Martin, hello.
Good evening.
So CCTV cameras, how do they help us solve crimes?
Well, of course, there are a lot of cameras in this country, as you quite rightly said in your introduction. And there are a number of ways in which they have helped identify offenders, and that's their principal advantage. They can identify people actually committing the offence, and so it can be used against them. It can also sometimes be useful in just clarifying who has committed an offence, so therefore should be the subject of police interest, and those who haven't and are outside it, so can be excluded from police interest.
So is that when they're most effective, just giving you that initial clue as to who you need to talk to?
Well, that's by far, I think, the most common advantage of them. I mean, it's not just crime, of course. It could be missing people and other things too. But the principal advantage is that. The trouble is, of course, that in reality it requires a camera to be working, pointing in the right direction, a very good image that's collected centrally, and all the elements that need to come together to make it effective means that most of the time it's not as good as many people would think it would be. And that's why I think there are quite legitimate claims that there are too many cameras and many of the images that come from them are often not very good. They're often not watched, especially these days, because councils in particular can't afford to do it.
Well, this is the thing. If councils, if small town councils and district councils are pulling their 24/7 monitoring, is there any point in the cameras being there?
Well, just because they're not being monitored 24/7 doesn't mean they're no use whatsoever. I mean, sometimes they can be used to research after the event. So, for example, they can be on, and we know that something happened at 11 o'clock at Saturday night in the High Street. We can go back and see what's on camera. So they can sometimes be useful like that. And sometimes they're only monitored at very busy periods, for example, on Friday and Saturday night. But the point that they're no longer watched the whole time is slightly inevitable, I think, given cutbacks and given the fact that compared to other things, they're just one measure in the fight against crime, and often other things are better.
Now, the question I'm asking tonight is, how would you feel if your CCTV was taken away? So I should ask you that, really, shouldn't I? What would it mean for you and your family if your local town lost it?
Well, it may well do, actually, and it's already being monitored from another town. I don't think I would be too concerned if the cameras were not monitored 24/7. I think the logic of that was in an era, particularly the 90s and the early part of this century, when people imagine that if you put a camera up in a particular area, offenders would think, oh, I'm going to be seen, I won't commit offences. But that's not how they feel, and by and large, they get round it. And it's only in the extreme cases where it's particularly helpful. If there's a murder or a terrorist event, it can be extremely helpful.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm going to speak to Big Brother Watch in just a moment, and they argue very strongly that when these cameras go up, they've looked at statistics which they says that the cameras don't actually cut crime, because what a lot of councils do is allow the police presence to drop because the cameras are there, so you're not actually helping crime figures drop.
Well, they may well be. I think there's a lot in what they say. I mean, the evidence actually, I think, is a little bit thin on this, but the point they make, that the cameras don't necessarily contribute to a reduction in crime, is, I think, a strong one in many cases. And I think a whole range of organisations, including that one, have done a very good job in highlighting some of the real issues about the use of CCTV, because we were very much in favour in this country. I mean, I've often done these sort of interviews abroad. People are amazed in the phone-ins that we've got cameras in our streets and our residential areas, and the public want it. So there's a lot more scepticism abroad. And I think the other thing, though, is it is very true to say we need to ask ourselves, do we need to be watched? And I think the answer is not as much as we are. But it's also a case of these often aren't effective, and they're not the best use of resources.
Thanks for that. Fascinating point put by Professor Martin Gill, criminologist for Perpetuity Research. So if they don't necessarily always cut crime, Would you miss your CCTV? This is my question for you tonight. How would you feel if your CCTV was taken away? Let me know. So more on CCTV, and my question for you as to how you would feel if your CCTV was taken away. Now, how would you feel about your CCTV being taken away? I've been speaking to Nick Pickles from Civil Liberties campaign group Big Brother Watch, and I started by asking him what his main objection was to CCTV.
Well, CCTV is a way of monitoring everybody's movements, and so we think should only be used where it's absolutely necessary. Yet, all the research that's been conducted into town centre CCTV shows that it has a negligible impact on public safety, so we're all being watched and we're no safer.
Why do you think then, when town councils threaten to take it away, there's such a response from shopkeepers, people who run businesses and locals to keep it?
Well, I think in a lot of towns it's because they get nothing else. We've been doing research over the past few years looking at cameras, and councils across the country have spent more than £500 million in the past 5 years on CCTV. That could have put thousands of extra police officers on the street. So I think a lot of people complain because it's become really a choice of you have CCTV or you have nothing. We think that's a false choice, and we do need more robust efforts on the streets to actually prevent crime rather than filming it.
Why do you say their use is negligible, or their success rate is negligible? I was just thinking yesterday, we lingered quite some time on the 20th anniversary of the death of Jamie Bulger, and everybody remembers those iconic CCTV pictures of those two 10-year-olds leading Bulger away. And then there's the pictures of the 7/7 bombers that were shown again and again and again. I mean, surely it has its uses.
Well, the Bulger case was a horrific incident, but the actual evidence that convicted the murderers in that case was DNA evidence, and CCTV only showed that the children were involved. It didn't prove they committed the crime. So what we want to talk about is how do you prevent crime now? There's always going to be horrific instances that are often unpreventable, but the Home Office in 2005 concluded that the CCTV schemes that have been assessed had little overall effect on crime levels. And in the case of London, for example, 4 out of 5 of the London boroughs with the highest number of CCTV cameras actually have lower than average detection rates for crimes. So, yes, there's individual cases where it's useful, but actually across the broad spectrum, you have to look at countries like America, who've had much more success in reducing crime by dealing with the causes of crime on the streets and having more police officers without recoursing to this massive scale of surveillance we have in Britain.
Well, you sound as if you're campaigning to get more bobbies on the beat. Well, why can't we have that and the cameras?
Well, clearly there isn't an unlimited amount of money, and you have to make resource choices. But if you think that, Britain now has 1% of the world's population, and one estimate says we have 20% of the world's CCTV cameras, are our crime rates disproportionately lower than cities like Paris or Berlin or New York? No, they're not. So we need a different approach to policing and to preventing crime. And unfortunately, for towns across the country, CCTV's become a substitute for policing rather than a part of what can be a much more wider and strategic response to crime.
Civil Liberties campaigner Nick Pickles from Big Brother Watch. Let me know what you think. How would you feel if your CCTV was taken away? 0345 300 1858. So I'm asking you about CCTV. There's been a suggestion from quite a few places across England that with budgets being slashed and council having less money to spend, either they'll have to reduce the amount of monitoring or they'll simply have to turn the cameras off. And I wanted to know how you would feel if your CCTV was taken away. 0345 300 1858 is the number. Bob's on the phone in Leicester. Hi, Bob.
How are you doing?
I'm good. So you've got experience of having quite a few cameras around where you live, is that right?
Yeah, well, it's city life. The thing about it is they mention the fact of policing. Well, crime's going to happen no matter where you are. No matter how many policemen are on the road, they're not going to prevent it, in my opinion. So with the cameras, that's part of the life now. The cameras I have installed and I've got look after my car, look after the front of the premises, they look after the rear of the premises. This is my private house, and also in my business the same. Now, with having those cameras, so far it's helped the police detect and lock away somebody that's a traffic warden in the street. We've had where there's been an accident and people have been run over and killed, and it's all part and parcel of getting the people convicted and put away.
if the cameras were removed, then it's going to make the police's job much harder. It's all right talking about DNA, but there's not DNA left at every incident.
Well, you've heard the argument from Big Brother Watch, where he went through a number of London boroughs. The 4 or 5 with the highest number of cameras had the lowest rate of detection of crimes, and his implication was people throw up the cameras and don't bother doing the proper policing.
Right, well, the cameras that are installed in the city centres, most of them are movable cameras. The other problem is there's not enough cameras, and they could be pointing in the wrong direction when something happens.
So for you, Bob, more cameras will be better?
Absolutely, and private individuals that have fixed cameras looking at a set area, you find people are blasé to cameras anyway. If they're going to do an act in front of a camera, they're going to do it.
They'll do it regardless. Reg is in St Albans. Hi, Reg.
Hello, mate, all right?
I'm good, yeah. So have you got personal CCTV as well?
Yeah, we've got cameras facing down onto the sheds where the tractors and the machinery all are.
And did you put them up because you'd had problems?
There's been a lot of trouble around here, with diesel and tractor bits being stolen. And anyway, our one cuts in when the beam's broken. It cuts in on the main telly. And we were sitting watching the telly, just not this Christmas gone, the Christmas before, and it come on, and we were watching these 3 blokes trying to break into the shed, and, didn't worry about it because we've got dogs in there. And we're quite profitable night because we ended up with brand new bolt croppers, crowbars, it was quite nice, really. And all we lost was 1 padlock.
So they don't actually scare people off, but it does mean that you can do something about it if you see them.
Yeah, as I say, but the dogs had the well, how can I put it nicely?
Yeah.
They had a nice month.
It sounds like they did. Those are your personal ones. What about if they were taken away in your local city centre? Would that bother you?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When you talk about Bolger, when he got taken, and that girl what got hit in the head in London a few weeks ago, where the chap went and hit her from behind for no reason. But they got him, didn't it? So I think myself we should keep the cameras.
OK, thanks for that. Be interested. That's Reg in St Albans. Before that, you heard from Bob in Leicester. Polly says, CCTV cameras, where do I start? In a normal, healthy community where most members know one another, there's no need. In the urban world where faceless people rule and law enforcement representatives are rare, CCTV is extremely important. No one knows how many crimes have never happened because of their presence. Do we want to remove them and find out? No way. Where there's large volumes of people, keep the CCTV. Wasn't it fascinating to hear from the criminologist who actually was coming on to talk about why it was a good thing, was saying that he goes on phone-ins like this anywhere else but here in the UK, and everybody goes nuts. Why on earth would we want that level of surveillance? This is something unique to this country. Isn't that the most extraordinary thing? A broadcast-quality CCTV recording showed an assault with a metal rod. The assailant and his cronies then conspired to give a false account of events. The film proves they lied, yet no charges were brought. Undoubtedly, because they were all wearing police uniforms, says this. The cameras were pointless, says this textee. 81333 is the text number. Start your text with the word Mark. If you want to call, 0345 300 1858.